Hey folks, welcome back to Canada's Boxing Channel. I hope everyone's doing well. This is time, as I promised, for another one of these career retrospective historical look-backs, if you like. It's been about a month since I did one, and as promised, here we are. Now, some people might say, that's okay, but why Ernie Tyrell? Well, let me explain. Last week, we saw the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world fight in Wembley between the Ukraine's Oleksandr Usyk and Britain's Daniel Dubois. And Usyk's fifth round KO of Dubois has prompted lots of people to talk about Muhammad Ali and Usyk being compared. Of course, they share the same birth date, and they're both 6'3", and they're very comparable builds. Now, of course, today, Usyk is carrying a few pounds more than Ali did in his prime. And it begs the question then, well, what was Ali's best performance? Now, many people say it was against Cleveland Williams. I happen to think that isn't the case. I happen to think that Cleveland Williams was an exceptionally good fighter, particularly when he fought against Sonny Liston. But by the time he fought against Ali, the big cat had been shot, he'd lost a lot of his intestines, and he was still carrying around in his body, until the day he died, part of a .357 slug. I tend to think that Ali's best performance, and the one that's in ways the most comparable to what Usyk did against Dubois, is against Ernie Tyrell. Ernie Tyrell, it was considered to be a spiteful performance, and I think that there's a little bit of spite that we saw in Usyk's destruction, certainly, beating of Daniel Dubois. So I figured, let's have a good look at Ernie Tyrell. Right, I've got my notes here because I'll never keep all these dates in my mind. There's no way. He was born on April the 4th, 1939 in Mississippi. And Tyrell was one of 10 children in a sharecropper family. And I think, that sort of sets the backdrop. We're talking about poverty here. We're talking about pre-civil rights America. We're talking about people who had very, very little. And they were, to be frank, not far removed from indentured servants in many respects. The family moved to Chicago, and Ernie Tyrell took up boxing. He also sang in a family group called, interestingly enough, the Heavyweights. He had quite a bit of success as an amateur boxer. He lost the 1956 Chicago Golden Gloves final. And then in 1957, he won the Chicago and the Intercity Golden Gloves at the light heavyweight division. Now, he turned pro in 1957. And by 1962, he built a 24-2 record, including an early win over Joe Hemphill and Tony Hunsaker, who was quite a decent fighter. His first big loss, which was a knockout, came in 1962 at the hands of the big cat, Cleveland Williams. But he bounced back. And in 1963, he avenged that loss to Cleveland Williams. Got a split decision win. He also, in 1963, beat the very, very useful Zora Foley. And in 1964, he beat the exceptional light heavyweight Bob Foster, who gained weight for this fight and stepped into the ring at a positively massive, for him, 183 pounds, but he was still almost 20 pounds lighter than Ernie Tyrell. Now, I don't know how well discussed this is amongst regular fans, but boxing historians will know that the WBA actually had stripped Muhammad Ali of the WBA title because Ali had arranged a rematch with Sonny Liston. And in order to get a WBA champion, Ernie Tyrell was matched with Eddie Machen, also a very competent contender. And he won the vacant belt, the WBA, on March the 5th, 1965. He defended that belt, Ernie Tyrell this is, twice. Once against the very, very tough Canadian George Chuvalo. I've done, and you will find it in the historical playlist, I've done a career retrospective of George Chuvalo. People think that George Chuvalo, he was a very, very tough fellow. Never put down, never stopped. And still with us today, though sadly living in a care home in Ontario. Besides the defense against George Chuvalo for the WBA championship, Ernie Tyrell also defended against Doug Jones. Now, people might remember that a lot of people at the time felt that Doug Jones had actually beaten Ali in their encounter. Now, despite holding the WBA belt, many people, boxing writers and fans, still considered Muhammad Ali to be the real champion. He was recognized by the WBC, the New York State Athletic Commission, and The Ring magazine, as it's now called. So, obviously, Ernie Tyrell and Muhammad Ali find themselves on a collision course at this point in time. And Muhammad Ali was, of course, an absolute master of not only self-promotion, but of selling a fight. He was ahead of the curve. He was ahead of the curve in many respects, of course, right? The world had not seen a heavyweight move like Muhammad Ali. He modeled himself on his idol, the great, the incomparable Sugar Ray Robinson. And Ali was certainly ahead of the curve in being able to manage the media. He engaged in what we would today call trash talking. And part of this sort of fed into this fight with Ernie Tyrell, who had known Muhammad Ali as Cassius Clay and continued to call Ali by his former name of Clay. And he said, I knew him as Clay. I hadn't gotten used to the new name. We look back now from the position of 2025, and we say, well, you should have. This is, if the man chooses a new name, you should have used the new name. Yes, I understand that, but they were different times, and perhaps an analogy might be in 2025, where we are living in a world of gender fluidity, if a chap that you know very, very well, you've known him for a long time, decides to change gender and adopt a different name and certainly different pronouns, you might entirely unintentionally get it wrong. I mean, you some people might intentionally get it wrong, and I'm not here to say one thing or the other, but I'm just trying to say that there is some analogy. I'm not certain that Ernie Tyrell was intending to really get to Ali by use of the birth name Cassius Clay. Honestly, I don't know, and I don't think anybody really does. But regardless, Muhammad Ali, never one to let an issue go to waste, decided to make a big deal out of this, and it definitely sold the fight. Ali, of course, labeled Tyrell an Uncle Tom, which, for the son of a sharecropper to be called such a term, yes, it wasn't not one of Ali's finest moments, and to be perfectly honest, one that he repeated with even less sort of dignity, if you like, against the great Joe Frazier. But like I say, Ali he wasn't called the Louisville Lip for no reason. Anyhow, he referred to Ernie Tyrrell as Uncle Tom and said he's gonna get his ass whopped. And in an ABC pre-fight build-up, a skirmish broke out. It was an absolute, tussle. You can find this, I believe, on YouTube in black and white, and all sorts of shenanigans going on. So this sort of stuff didn't start with Derek Chisora throwing tables in the air, did it? Anyhow, the fight was held between Ali and Tyrrell, both with their titles up for grabs, on February the 6th, 1967, at the Houston Astrodome. And this is for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. You see the parallel. Usyk, Dubois, Ali, Tyrrell. Early rounds were apparently, according to the boxing writers who were present, and this is where we really, really rely upon boxing writers. Even though you can find the fights online, the boxing writers, when you sort of go back, I would say sort of almost any time pre-1970, more and more reliance needs to be placed on the boxing writers. They were the ones at the scene, and they knew what they were looking at. Camera angles, of course, can only tell us one thing, especially in those times. Tyrrell's left eye was apparently swelling by round 3, and by about round 6, Muhammad Ali took control. And if you talk to people who were around at the time and were, real sort of, boxing aficionados, many people say that Ali could have stopped him by about round 6 or 7, or the latest round 8. And that Ali chose not to. From about round 8 onwards, Ali was relentless in his taunting of Ernie Tyrrell. The "what's my name? Pop, pop. What's my name? Pop, pop" kind of thing. He thumbed his eye, and he dragged him along the ropes, and he gave Ernie Tyrrell a real shellacking, to be perfectly honest, an absolute beatdown. The final scores... by the way, Arthur Mercanti was the ref, very famous ref. 148, 138, 148, 133, 148, 137. Remember, 15-round fights. Which, by the way, if you are talking about all-time great sort of stuff, as you know, I'm a big believer in it all depends upon the metrics you use. One must remember that these fighters from back in the day, not only did they fight every couple of months in some cases, but the 15-round limit makes a difference. Anyways, this victory of Ali over Ernie Tyrrell is widely remembered as one of Ali's most spiteful or vicious performances. And fair to say, I think he humiliated Ernie Tyrrell. In my view, it was Ali's most demonstrative performance. He absolutely was the master of Ernie Tyrrell. Whether he could have stopped him earlier or not, I tend to think he could, but he was certainly there to, as he said himself, give Tyrrell an ass whopping. And that's a little bit like Usyk Dubois, where Usyk was setting his feet more and was clearly he wanted to put a little bit of a sting on Dubois, didn't he? 6 months later, after this event, there was a WBA 8-man tournament, and Tyrrell lost to Thad Spencer and then Manuel Ramos, which prompted him to retire in 1967. He did make a comeback in 1970. Just going to check. Yes, sorry. And he had 7 consecutive wins. One TKO, mostly unanimous decisions, another couple of TKOs. And then in 1973, he lost over 12 rounds, non-championship. It was for the National Americas title, so not one of the big titles, if you like. He lost against the very, very capable Chuck Wepner. Though, again, if you go back to the record and read about the fight, you will see that most people say it was a robbery, that he shouldn't have lost to Chuck Wepner. It was widely seen as a robbery. Judged by the ref alone, a chap by the name of Harold Vallan, who scored it 5 rounds to 7. But like I say, many of the boxing writers present, and these, remember, boxing writers back in the day were really knowledgeable. Like they really were dyed-in-the-wool sort of boxing people. He went on, Ernie Tyrell says, 3 months later, again, look at times people fought. Today we're used to seeing somebody fight maybe once or possibly twice a year. 3 months later, no, Ernie Tyrell's back in the ring, this time against Jeff Merritt, who stopped him in the first round, TKO. And then Ernie Tyrell, thankfully recognizing, that his moment in the sun, if you like, had passed. He retired for good. But he returned to music, and he sang with Ernie Tyrell and the Heavyweights for another 13 years. And his sister Jean later joined the Supremes, Diana Ross and the Supremes. Ernie Tyrell became a record producer and a boxing promoter. He also managed James Quick Tillis, Alfonso Ratliff, and Ronaldo Snipes. He ran for the position of alderman, like a councillor type position in Chicago's 34th Ward, and he launched a cleaning and maintenance business as well. He was inducted into the World Boxing Hall of Fame, so another Hall of Famer that Ali beat. So if you're, again, looking at metrics of how to assess all-time greats, that's one of the metrics I use, is how many Hall of Famers did a fighter beat? But for more discussion on that, I recommend you look at my videos about the top 10, my top 10 heavyweights of all time. It'll explain all the metrics I use. Ernie Tyrell passed away in 2014, aged 75 years of age, and he had been suffering from what was diagnosed at the time as Alzheimer's, dementia. Was that partly CTE? Well, usually when a boxer is diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, the question about CTE is never far from our minds, is it? A layered life. Yes, I think that's the right way to put it. He was a champion. And no doubt he was a champion. He was a champion boxer. He was a singer. He was a promoter, manager. He was a public servant. But of course, he's forever tied to that "What's My Name" fight, which I suppose allows his memory to live on, but probably not for all of the right reasons. So there's my little career retrospective of Ernie Tyrell. I invite you to read more about all these great fighters whose careers I sort of touch on. There's only so much that you can cover in a 20-minute little video, but hopefully if you already know of Ernie Tyrell, this will remind you of some of the things. If you've not heard of Ernie Tyrell, hopefully this will inspire you to at least have a look at YouTube, to see his fights, and maybe to read some more about him, because I really believe that we should never forget these great fighters. They weren't getting paid. I read, I think it was yesterday, Dubois got £50 million or more. I mean, these were these great fighters of the past. They fought for nothing like that, right? So let's remember them. Let's remember them for what they did. Let's remember them for the foundation of heavyweight boxing that they built upon and built. And let's remember them for the warriors that they were, the kind of folks who, they had to be nailed down to the canvas. So, a great fighter who lost to arguably one of the greatest of all time, but also prevailed over some exceptionally good fighters. Cleveland Williams, Zora Foley, Eddie Macon, George Chuvalo. None of these fellows should be sniffed at. Let's not let recency bias taint our thinking about this. Also, let's not let nostalgia bias taint our thinking. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed this. I love doing this kind of stuff. Much more interesting to me than somebody slapping an egg on somebody's face. But, you know, you got to take it all as it comes, right? Thanks for watching. Please like, please share, please subscribe if you can. And I'll see you on the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.